Before we step into the shadowed workshops and echoing guild halls of a medieval town, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Whether you're settling in for sleep in Manchester, beginning your evening wind down in Melbourne, or finding a quiet breath somewhere between, I'm grateful you've joined me. If these gentle wanderings through history's quieter rooms speak to you, please subscribe so you never miss our soft descents into the past. Now, let your shoulders loosen. Picture a narrow lane after Vespers, shutters latched, cobbles damp, and one small door lit by a steady flame. Inside, candlemakers weigh beeswax blocks like gold, twist wicks with patient fingers, and write rules in ledgers so that light behaves. Faith and fear walk together here. The promise of salvation in a chapel flicker, the warning of darkness in an untrimmed wick. Tonight, we'll follow every peculiar rule of the Guild of Candlemakers. Odd laws that kept flames level, markets honest and nights safe. Breathe in honey and smoke, and come sit by the hearth where the wax warms and the stories begin. You step into the guild hall at first light, when the town is a hush and the river fog still rubs its eyes. The long table smells of oak, ledger glue, and something sweet. Beeswax, newly unwrapped. Master Corbett, wearing the fur-edged tabard of his office, places a brass balance on the table as if it were a reliquary. No oath without weight, he says, and the wardens, Agnes the warden and Bartram the tallyman, nod like clock figures come gently to life. Marit of the wax market, a widow with steady hands, rests her palm upon a beeswax block stamped with a hexagon seal. Beside her stands Thomas, her apprentice, still green as April nettles but all attention. The first peculiar rule unfurls in the still air. An oath is sworn upon honest wax. Not a word upon a saint's bone nor a gospel page, but upon the very stuff of their trade. The guild believes a promise is more likely to hold if your fingers remember the density of it, the slight give, the coolness that warms only slowly. Corbett explains the penalty for false swearing, not spectacle, not cruelty, but quiet remedies, days of labour for the poorhouse lamps, casks of wax yielded to the almoner, the shame of one's mark inked small in the margins of the guild book. We measure candles, Agnes says, tapping the scale's tongue, and we measure ourselves. You notice how everyone watches the beams settle, how even the sunlight seems to pause before taking its place upon the floorboards. Thomas looks to Marit, who gives the faintest smile. She lifts the block. The balance kisses level. So begins your service, Corbett murmurs, to light, to neighbours, to the hour that must be held. The guild's second rule fits neatly into numbers but reaches into character. From 1 lawful pound of beeswax, no heavier, no lighter, a master must draw a fixed yield of tapers. The count varies by season, for winter demands thicker candles, summer slighter, yet the table of yields is copied into every journeyman's pocketbook. Bartram, the tallyman, lays out lead tokens stamped with a tiny candle. Each token equals 1 approved taper. Thomas chalks figures on a slate, 8 from a winter pound, 12 from a summer pound. Marit demonstrates the lingering patience of the dip, wick lowered, lifted, cooled in a patient breath of air, then lowered again, each layer an even whisper. What makes it peculiar is the way profit is braided to restraint. To stretch the pound too far is to invite guttering, smoke, and prayers that smell of kitchens rather than chapels. To underyield is to hoard and to push prices toward panic. So the guild prints the yields and posts them on the market board alongside fish days and fair days, binding everyone to a shared arithmetic. Greed burns faster than tallow, Agnes says, the corner of her mouth deciding on a smile. A fine for false yield is paid not in coin, but in light. The offender must supply a night's worth of chapel candles at Vespers, standing by to trim wicks so each flame behaves. The lesson is public and softly firm. Thomas counts token to taper, his fingers smudged with chalk. He looks up when Corbett reminds the room. Our pounds weigh, trust. Outside, a bell marks prime. Inside, thin smoke hangs like a ribbon. Marritt's tapers gather on the rack, identical as siblings, pale as morning straw. The pound sits again on the scale, steady as a heartbeat. You can almost hear the town exhale, content to live inside rules that keep darkness at bay. If the body of a candle is wax, its soul is wick, and the guild is very particular about souls. The third rule, wicks shall be of clean linen, twisted from 3 strands, neither hair's breadth too tight nor slack as a tired rope. Sister Elswythe from the nearby priory arrives with a basket of off-cut linens, alms from the infirmary. She knows what the guild knows. Dirty fibre smokes, not stutter, and prayer becomes a cough. Marritt teaches Thomas to judge twist by feel, not sight. He closes his eyes, rubbing the strand between thumb and finger until it hums with that curious balance, firm enough to draw melted wax, gentle enough to allow a neat, domed ember. Corbett recites exceptions: rushlights for kitchens, coarse wicks for outdoor lanterns, but for altars and deathbeds, linen of mercy. A peculiar clause states that wicks for funerary candles may include a single hair from the deceased, braided discreetly within. A small kindness to the grieving, a tether to the flicker by which a last vigil is kept. Agnes brings out the wick measuring board with tiny notches, one for pilgrims' tapers, one for Guildhall sconces, one marked storm. She notes length, whispers the old rhyme. Short for haste, long for waste, thumb to brow for knightly grace. Thomas repeats until it settles in his memory like a gentle song. The penalty for ill-twisted wick is communal teasing and a day of trimming duty at the priory, a service both humbling and oddly soothing. Wicks cut true, flames learn manners. The room smells faintly of warm flax and beeswax. The window keeps a square of pale sky. The city slowly comes awake. The fourth rule concerns truth in the substance itself. Beeswax is prized for its steady flame and chapel-clean scent, while tallow, honest but humble, belongs to kitchens and street lamps. The guild's purity seal, a small hexagon with a crowned bee, may be impressed only upon candles proven by the honey test. Corbett sets out 2 bowls. In one, warm water. In the other, honey thinned to a syrup. A shaving from a test candle is dropped into each. Beeswax floats. Tallow sinks or clouds the honey. And the room learns again that light has flavours. Marritt tells Thomas how merchants sometimes shave a tallow heart and coat it in beeswax, a deceit that looks innocent until midnight, when the candle breathes sour and gutters. The penalty is particular. An offender must stand under the market awning on fair day and explain the difference between beeswax and tallow to every buyer, handing out small, honest tapers as apologies. Education as remedy, Agnes says, placing the box of iron seals on the table. Each seal is numbered and signed for. Lose it, and your right to stamp is suspended until the next quarter court. The honey test becomes a ritual as gentle as prayer. Shavings whisper into the bowls, the surface trembles, decisions are made without anger. Sister Elswythe inhales, smiling at the faint sweetness. She knows how a pure flame can steady a frightened heart. Thomas looks through the honey the way one looks through amber, as if tiny histories are caught there. Fields of clover, walls warm with sun, hives murmuring like distant seas. He writes purity seal in his notebook, underlining it as if underlining his own resolve. The market charter reads like a map of shade and courtesy. The 5th rule dictates where candlemakers may set their canopies, forbidding the windy corners that make flames misbehave and the shadowed arches where purity is hard to see. Stalls selling altar tapers must line the east end near the church lane. Household candles mingle with spices and salt where buyers linger. Prices are posted on waxed boards. A pilgrim's taper for a humble coin. a wedding candle dearer, but promised to burn steady to the last dance. Marit's stall is neat as a psalter page. She arranges bundles by purpose: vigil, vespers, storm, birth, and bath. Thomas polishes the small glass in which a sample flame shows its character: no smoke, no drip, no impatience. Hodge, the tallowman, broad as an oak door and cheerful in his rivalry, sets up nearby with stout kitchen candles. The peculiar part is how the charter forbids hawking cries. Candles must be sold by calm demonstration. The customer is invited to watch a wick trimmed, to see how a tiny bell snuffer saves a tablecloth. Let the flame speak, Agnes smiles, pinning the price board. If a stall is found to have misled, the remedy is not harsh but humbling. A day's selling at the poor end of the market, where voices are soft and coins are thin, and where, as many discover, gratitude is a light that tastes sweeter than profit. Sister Elswith pauses to buy vigil tapers for the infirmary. She thanks Marit for candles that do not sputter when breath is shallow. Thomas wraps them in linen, tying each bundle with a thread the colour of wheat. The bell for terce drifts across the square. The stalls seem to breathe in unison, a village of small suns ready for nightfall. With sunset comes the sixth rule, born of crowded timbers and narrow streets. No open flame abroad after curfew, save the watchman's lantern and the licensed night candle for midwife or monk on urgent call. The watchman, Noel, carries a horn-glassed lamp stamped with the guild's mark and a small tally stick. Each time he loans light for needful passage, he carves a notch. At week's end, the guild supplies fresh wicks in gratitude for his careful feat. A curious clause permits a single candle to be set in an upper window during storms, so sailors on the river know a household wakes and prays. The candle must be sheltered by horn, its wick trimmed to the breadth of a barleycorn. Thomas practices trimming with a little hook blade until he can make the flame draw in, round and mild as sleep. We are stewards of night, Corbett reminds them, and neighbours to roofs. Marit stores a jar of sand within arm's reach, as every good house should, and a damp cloth besides. The guild teaches not only flame, but how to end flame without panic. Hodge grumbles good-naturedly about the curfew. His kitchen candles would like to roam, yet even he agrees that a town is safest when dusk is tame. Sister Elswith tells of infants eased by a small, steady light, how fears soften when shadows keep their edges. The rule's penalty is simple: a fine paid in lantern service, an evening walking with Noel in drizzle or frost, learning how quiet the city can be when windows are only stars. Thomas walks a stretch beside the watchman, listening to water and shutters. He returns with cheeks pinked by the cold and a respect for how darkness is managed rather than banished. The seventh rule charts a life. 7 years an apprentice, 7 as journeyman, and a masterwork at the turning. The journeyman's candle is no ordinary taper. It must burn from Compline to Lord's without a single tear of wax or smoky sigh. Thomas traces the requirement in the margin of his notebook, breathing a little faster at the thought. Marit assures him the trick is not trickery at all, patience in the dip, leniency in the twist, a wick seated like a pilgrim content in his pew. To earn the right to wander for learning, a journeyman presents one such candle to the court of wardens. If it misbehaves, there is no scold, only a return to lessons and a night spent in the testing chamber, where flames are read like poetry. Agnes sets the testing room with water jars, snuffers, sand, and a clay draft screen perforated with holes to mimic real winds. Let the candle meet the world before it meets the church, she says. A peculiar kindness threads the rule. A journeyman short on coin may pay his application fee in light, supplying vigil candles to the sick or ferry lamps for river folk. The guild keeps a ledger of hours illuminated as if counting prayers. Thomas watches an older journeyman, Bjorn, present his work. The flame holds like a note sung soft and true. When Lord's arrives and the bell stirs pigeons from the roof, Bjorn's candle still wears its little dome of light. Corbett grants him the brass-pin passport to travel for a season. Learn new methods, he says. Bring back better calm. Light speaks, but colour whispers. The 8th rule permits pigment only where liturgy agrees. Beeswax may be tinted with saffron for certain feast eves, woad for penitential processions, and a faint verdigris for the blessing of fields, but never so strong as to shadow the flame's heart. Sister Elsweith brings a cloth-wrapped packet of madder. It's red, shy, and earthy. For the martyr's vigil, she says, a blush, not a shout. Marit teaches Thomas to grind pigment with a drop of warm wax on a slate, making a paste thin as rumour. They fold it into the melt until the kettle holds the faintest hue. The peculiar clause forbids gaudy colours in markets. Only the church's orders may wear tint, and even then, restraint is the soul of the matter. Hodge admires the woad-tinged lantern tapers used on a river watch. Blue, remembering the water that must be respected. Penalties for loud colour are almost comical. A morning spent washing the guild windows until your own face learns moderation from the grey sky. Agnes keeps examples of acceptable shades pinned to small boards, each labelled Field Blessing, Vigil, Storm Prayer. Tomas discovers how a candle can carry season without boasting. He touches the cool taper and finds his thumb faintly stained, a tiny secret blessing. The room feels like a painter's, but quieter. The pigments are not for pictures, but for hours, setting mood without stirring the soul too high to rest. When the pigments are capped and slate cleaned, Corbett nods at the row of modestly tinted candles. Let the colour be a kindness to the eye, he says, never a burden on the night. Outside, clouds braid sunlight and shade. Inside, the new candles blush only when the flame leans close, as if remembering a story it will tell without hurry. Every guild keeps order, and the 9th rule shapes its temper. Complaints are heard on Market's Eve in the quiet court, where voices never rise and judgments land like feathers. A fisher's wife, Maud, brings a taper that wept wax onto her husband's chart. Hodge confesses a batch rushed on a rainy day. Agnes listens, eyes kind, Quill waiting. The remedy is bespoke. Hodge will replace the chart and spend an evening mending nets by lamplight with the fisherman, a neighbourly apprenticeship in patience. Marit once received such a remedy herself years ago when grief thinned her temper. She had misjudged a wick, and a vigil sputtered. She tended that family's hearth for a week, learning the household's rhythm until her candles matched it. Our law is not spectacle, Corbett says, but mending. Thomas is surprised by how pleasant it is to sit in a cool hall, while small wrongs are set right by small, meaningful labours. The peculiar element, any complaint proven spiteful owes light to the town, lanterns for the gatekeepers on sleet nights, the kind of service that melts pettiness. Sister Elsweith observes, offering tea flavoured with mint and a smile that forgives human hurry. Records are kept with care, not to stack shame, but to track what works. Every remedy is a recipe, Agnes notes, filing the parchment. Tomas writes in his notebook, mercy retains customers. When the session ends, Maud leaves with steady candles and a fixed chart. Hodge tips his cap, relieved to be useful. The hall empties without triumph or defeat, only a sense of threads retied. Outside, the square is hushed by the first drops of rain. Inside, the court's lantern is snuffed with a little bell. Gentle order rests upon the town like a shawl. The 10th rule expects every candlemaker to be a quiet firefighter. Twice a week, pairs make rounds with Noel the watchman, peering into bakehouses and taverns, reminding keepers of the sand jar rule, a clay pot of sand within 3 steps of any flame. No shouting, no scolding, just the calm choreography of safety. Thomas carries a little wooden scoop shaped like a shell. He practices smothering a sample flame, releasing only a thread of smoke. The peculiar clause insists on rehearsals. On a still afternoon, Agnes gathers the apprentices in the courtyard to stage a spill. A taper knocked from a sconce, a cloth corner kissed by ember. With practiced hands, the cloth is brushed flat, the ember pinched, the sand poured like a brief, tidy snowfall. No drama, Corbett says. Ever helped a flame learn manners. Hodge, surprisingly nimble, shows how to lift a smouldering wick with a damp stick and hum a tavern tune while the last heat dies. Sister Elswith thanks the guild for training the priory's novices. Their infirmary now keeps bowls of water and folded cloths as if they were pharmaceuticals. A penalty for houses without sand jars is neither fine nor shame. The guild delivers jars itself, stamped with the crown bee, and the household hosts tea for the neighbours to watch a demonstration. A community, it turns out, is built as much by shared safety as by shared stories. After rounds, Thomas sits on the Guildhall steps, listening to drips from the eaves and the town's many ordinary sounds. He feels the pride of a steward whose tools are quiet and whose work is invisible when it succeeds. Marit hands him a small cake flavoured with honey. He tastes the kinship between sweetness and flame. The day fades gently, as if the town and its candles agree to end together. Some debts are better paid in hours than in coins. The 11th rule creates a ledger unlike any other, the ledger of hours, where contributions are measured in hours of light given. When a roof leaks, the guild lights the carpenter's evening. When a midwife sits a long vigil, her room is bright without cost. Agnes tallies these entries with the patience of a gardener. Fairy lamp for storm night, 6 hours. Infirmary vigil, 12 hours. Thomas learns to calculate burn time by weight and wick, making arithmetic into kindness. A peculiar allowance lets apprentices earn back small mistakes by donating hours to specific neighbours. It's a gentle economy, drawing circles around people who need light more than money. Sister Elswith requests 12 hours for a widow's bedside Bible. Marit adds another 6 without a flourish. Hodge contributes stout tallow for the keyman during fogs, his name inked in the ledger with a flourished H that looks like a candle snuffer. Corbett keeps the ledger open on market days so townsfolk can see who has lit their corners. There is pride in it, but not boasting. If anything, a shared quiet. The penalty for refusing a reasonable request is simply conversation in the quiet court, where refusals tend to melt. Thomas discovers the pleasure of imagining a night he will not witness. The ferry moving across black water, the lamp a small, loyal star. In the workshop later, Marit teaches him to estimate burn hours by the naked eye. Listen for drip, look for shoulder, trust your nose. He smiles at the intimacy of these measures, the way light is treated like bread. The sun leans west, and the ledger's ink gleams brown as syrup. One by one, names become promises. One by one, promises become hours that soften edges. When the wind rolls in from the sea, the 12th rule takes charge. Storm candles must be broader at the base, their wicks slightly thicker, and they are to be set leeward of any door or shutter. The guild keeps a leeward board, an oaken circle with a tiny vane, to show where draughts will tumble. Thomas stands by the door as Agnes opens and shuts it in slow motion. He watches the flame bend, bow, then choose steadiness when placed just so. A peculiar directive forbids blessing a storm candle too loudly. Sister Elswith smiles at this. Prayers in tempests are to be low and rhythmic, the way sailors' songs set oars and hearts to the same measure. Marit pours a set of storm candles, their shoulders sloped like small hills. She explains the shoulder rule. A good storm candle carries extra wax above the wick's reach, a reserve for gusts that make the flame chew faster. Hodge contributes horn shields for lanterns, his craft suddenly delicate in his big hands. Penalties for careless placement are instructive rather than punitive. A windy day drill where the offender must move a single candle from place to place until it burns like a monk at prayer, unfussed by the rattle of the world. Thomas laughs softly when his first attempt smokes the shutter. By the fifth try, he has learned the door's secret language. Corbett enters last, wet at the shoulders, and nods at the orderly glow. Leeward, he murmurs, is just another word for listening. Rain needles the windows, and the town shrinks to the size of the room. The storm candles burn with steady heads, carrying a hum you feel more than hear. It is not defiance but company, and it makes the weather seem like a fellow traveller rather than a threat. Once a year the town becomes a river of flame. The 13th rule governs procession etiquette, distance between bearers, spacing of breaths, how to shield the flame when alleys squeeze. Pilgrims receive simple tapers. Dignitaries carry thicker processional candles capped with a small drip tray worked in tin. Marriott rehearses with Thomas in the lane, hands cupped, elbows tucked, the candle held as if it were a sleeping bird. A peculiar nicety. Each bearer must attend to the flame of the person behind them, not their own. Care outward, Sister Ellsworth says, demonstrating how a gently cupped hand can teach another flame to survive a corner's gust. Agnes chalks marks on the cobbles to show where eddies gather. Hodge supplies tallow lanterns to light the backs of the musicians. Their low tunes make footsteps fall into one gentle body. Penalty for jostling is mostly embarrassment and a stint at the end of the line, where novices learn with extra attention from wardens. Corbett oversees with soft authority, reminding everyone that the festival is both spectacle and prayer, and that a town's calm can be seen in how its flames keep company. Thomas finds himself watching the shadows rather than the lights, fascinated by how they braid and part like ribbons. Marriott whispers that she loves this night most. The guild's year made visible. When the real procession comes, the air tastes faintly of bees and tin. Windows open, children lean out drowsy and pleased. The river of flame rounds the market cross like a slow constellation learning to turn. The rules hold, not as shackles, but as the quiet grammar of beauty. And when the last bell sounds, the snuffers pass from hand to hand like blessings, and darkness returns in a way that feels chosen. The 14th rule pairs beginnings with endings. For births, a short, broad candle, scented faintly with chamomile, may burn beside the basin. For farewells, a narrow vigil taper burns with a thin, unwavering tongue. The guild forbids mixing their scents or shapes, trusting that families deserve distinct lights for different stories. Sister Ellsworth brings a list from the midwives. 5 births expected soon after the feast. 2 vigils likely before winter deepens. Marriott explains the oddest clause to Thomas. A single flax thread, dyed with a pinch of saffron, may be braided into a birth candle's wick, a colour of dawn hidden within. For a farewell taper, a strand of the deceased's linen is permitted, a thread almost invisible, the softness of a shared life offered back to the flame. Hodge listens with unusual quiet, twirling his cap. Even he treats this rule with gentleness. Penalties for muddling these forms are never fines. They are acts of repair. If a birth candle is shaped too tall, the candlemaker must sing with the midwives through one night, learning the rhythm of labour and lullaby. If a vigil taper smokes, its maker sits the next farewell to trim and whisper. We bind ourselves to the hours we serve, Agnes says, placing the 2 forms side by side on the bench. Thomas holds each in his hands, sensing their different gravities. One a cup of warmth, one a thin, faithful line. In the quiet that follows, Marriott pours a set of both, her face composed, her movements deliberate as prayer. The room is sweet with chamomile and a whisper of bees. Outside, geese argue on the river. Inside, the candles learn their manners without hurry. You feel the town's trust like a warm shawl, woven of small rules that make large moments bearable. The 15th rule watches the river. Ferrymen pay their due not always in coins, but in stories. And in exchange, the guild keeps their lanterns fed. Sea lanterns must be double-wicked, their horn panels washed with vinegar to clear river film, and their handles leather-wrapped against wet palms. Marit shows Thomas the trick of seating 2 wicks so they don't compete. Flames are siblings, she smiles. Teach them to share air. A peculiar clause requires that every lantern carry a tiny tin whistle. Should horn crack or wick drown, a ferryman can call for a fresh light from the nearest house that bears the crown bee mark. Thomas delivers such a lantern to old Père, who ferries at odd hours and speaks to the river as if it were a neighbour with strong opinions. Père pays with a tale of winter ice and a fish that leapt like a coin into the boat. Agnes records the lantern's hours in the ledger of light, the numbers neat enough to comfort. Penalty for neglect is a dawn on the ferry in fog, learning the patience of water. Hodge joins one morning, grumbling until the mist turns him thoughtful. He returns with a new respect for steady wicks and quiet feet. Sister Ellsworth blesses the lanterns in a whisper that makes them seem less like objects and more like companions with small responsibilities. As evening comes, Thomas watches the far bank appear and dissolve, the lantern a soft island in elastic grey. He understands that the river's darkness is not enemy but element, and that light afloat must be unflappable rather than bright. When the ferryman raises the whistle to test it, the note is thin and reassuring. Somewhere, a dog agrees. The lantern's twin tongues lean together like old friends sharing a joke the weather cannot hear. There is a candle for sorrow that is not despair. The 16th rule describes the penance candle, uncoloured, slender, trimmed short so the flame stays close to its wax. It casts a soft, small shadow and refuses to dramatize remorse. Sister Ellsworth orders a set each month for those who seek counsel. The peculiar clause here forbids placing mirrors near penance light. Reflections are deemed restless company when a heart seeks still water. Marit pours these with a slower hand, as if speed itself might jostle the soul. Thomas learns to cut the wick low, making a flame that curls slightly inward, contemplative as a monk leaning over a psalter. Hodge, awkward near this topic, fetches extra horn cups without being asked. Agnes writes in the ledger not names, but initials, privacy folded like a letter. Penalty for making a penance candle too grand is service in the confessional antechamber. Not listening, never that, but trimming and snuffing at Sister Ellsworth's gesture, learning the choreography of quiet. Corbett speaks softly of balance, how rules keep darkness from swaggering and light from boasting. In the testing room, penance candles make halos that barely touch. The air smells of bees and a faint breath of linen singe. Thomas notices how these candles seem to keep time differently, the hour stretched and thinned until regret loosens its shoulders. He understands that rules can be tenderness dressed as instruction. When the evening bell drifts through the window, Marit lines the new candles in a casket of plain wood. Enough light to find the first step, she says, closing the lid. Outside, the lane is still. Inside, the penance flames agree to be small and sure, a company for those mending their own maps. At midweek, the guild bell rings not for trade, but for mending. The 17th rule sets aside 1 hour when tools are sharpened, moulds repaired, wicks combed, and grievances sanded smooth. It is a ritual of maintenance, the town's heartbeat checking itself. Marit lays out the tin moulds. Thomas files a burr from a dip frame. Hodge oils the hinge of the big stamp with a care that surprises even him. Peculiarly, the rule requires a song, slow and repetitive. easy to hum without thought. Sister Elswith leads it, a plainchant that turns tasks into breathing. Agnes reads aloud the list of small faults noted during the week. A sconce too near a curtain, a stall cloth scorched at the edge, a wick comb missing a tooth. No blame, only repairs assigned like blessings. Corbett moves between benches, praising neat stitches and clever fixes. Penalty for skipping the hour of mending is to host it the following week, providing honey cakes and telling a lesson learned the hard way. Thomas volunteers a story of his first clumsy pour and the tearful river of wax it became. The laughter is kind, the lesson remembered. Tools shine, moulds fit true, the workshop sounds soften into a domestic purr. Even the bell seems to approve, its echo short and tidy. When the hour closes, the guild smells faintly of tin, oil and warm wood. The room feels reset, like a bed turned down. Thomas runs a finger along the dip frame and feels the absence of burrs as a kind of promise. Marit sets the moulds to dry, each a small cathedral for light to be born in. Outside, gulls argue on the roof. Inside, the guild holds its calm like a cup filled to the brim yet never spilling. Travellers on the pilgrim road arrive with dust in their hems and a need for gentleness. The 18th rule grants the almoner, Brother Martin, the right to request candles for pilgrims' shelters without price. He arrives, hat in hand, carrying news from way stations where rain comes through and the wind forgets its manners. "A dozen for the south shelter," he says, "and a handful of stubs for the warming shelf." Peculiarly, stubs are honoured in this rule. The ends of candles, too short for ceremony, perfect for an hour's comfort, are gathered in a lidded chest like small treasures. Thomas learns to pair stubs by size and wick temper, so they burn evenly when wedged into a clay dish. Marit wraps the shelter candles in oiled cloth. Hodge produces stout tallow as ballast for lanterns along muddy stretches. Agnes notes the donation in the ledger of hours, brow soft. Penalty for turning the almoner away is a night at the shelter as helper, learning how road-weary eyes brighten around a little shared light. Sister Elswith sends along a pouch of dried thyme. The shelters will smell a bit like gardens when the stubs burn. Corbett blesses the bundle with a practical prayer. May these flames find cold hands before the wind does. As Brother Martin departs, Thomas walks him to the road's edge. They watch two pilgrims approach, boots more patched than leather, faces cautious, hopeful. The shelter lamp will be their first welcome. The flame saying what words sometimes cannot. You are seen, and the dark will leave you be for a while. Thomas returns to the bench feeling taller, as if light has weight you can carry without bending. Walls tell stories about draughts you cannot see. The 19th rule sets the placement of sconces. Not above a tapestry's hem, not kissing a beam, always at a height measured by the thumb-to-brow test. Arm stretched, thumb at brow, anywhere the flame kisses is safe. Agnes demonstrates, her posture simple and sure. Thomas mimics, laughing when his first measurement crowns a doorway like a halo. Peculiarly, the rule also requires a wax bead test. A warmed bead is pressed to the wall where a sconce is planned. If it holds for a slow count of 12, the wall is dry and willing. If it slides, plaster waits. Hodge manufactures neat iron brackets with little rain lips to shoo away downdrafts. His pride sits easily on his shoulders today. Sister Elswith requests a line of sconces for the priory's outer corridor, where novices pace at night, learning psalms by heart. Penalty for a bad sconce is an afternoon replacing rushes underfoot and polishing soot from stone. Less punishment than mindfulness. Corbett tells a tale of a miserly lord whose sconces sat like barnacles under beams. After a visit from the guild, his hall breathed and his mood did too. Thomas sets a sconce in the guild stairwell, testing wick trimming at that height. The flame's cap becomes a neat oval. Content. The workshop adopts a rhythm. Measure, press bead, set bracket, light and watch. It is a choreography that leaves confidence behind like a footprint. Outside, the town exhales a breeze that the sconces barely notice. The rules feel less like restrictions and more like a language for teaching walls to hold light without sulking. 4 times a year, the guild gathers for the quarter court, when marks are renewed and hopes are weighed. The 20th rule covers the master's mark, each unique stamp registered in the big ledger, used to sign candles bound for churches and civic halls. Corbett polishes the stamp that was his father's. Marit fingers her own, a bee within a ring of barley. Thomas watches and wonders what his will be one day. Peculiarly, the court requires a candle reading. A master presents a single candle made in solitude, no helper's hands. The wardens study it as scribes study a page. The shoulder roundness, the wick seating, the memory of the melt held in tiny rings. Agnes reads Marit's candle with a smile that could be a benediction. This one would keep Lord's company, she says. Hodge presents a stout civic candle for the town hall, its base honest as bread. Penalty for a careless masterwork is not demotion, but mentoring, a fortnight paired with a different craft, glaziers, coopers, bell founders, to learn patience from other materials. Sister Elswythe offers tea as the room glows with 20 candles, each with a small difference that only love would notice. Tomas feels the press of time as a hand on his back, gentle, urging. He imagines his mark, small but true, and the lives his candles might quietly touch. When the court closes, Corbett stamps the ledger, and the sound is deeply satisfying, like a seal on a letter to the future. Outside, evening lifts its shawl. Inside, the guild's light is not brighter than usual, only more aware of itself, like a singer who has found the pitch of the room. When frost writes white fern on shutters, Candlemas approaches, and the 21st rule rustles like church linen. Each candlemaker owes a wax tithe measured not by purse, but by parish need. Altar tapers for the long evenings of Lent, sanctuary lamps filled against faint hearts. Corbett reads the Candlemas schedule, voice low as embers. Agnes holds the tally board, columns titled Household, Chapel, Wayfarer. The peculiar clause, payment may be made in hushed hands, meaning one delivers at dawn without knocking, leaving candles wrapped in linen at a widow's sill or a midwife's door. The ledger simply notes HH, and the town pretends not to know who brought the light. Marit demonstrates the Candlemas pour. Slightly taller bodies, wicks cut a finger's width longer, so the blessing service glows unbroken. Thomas balances bundles like loaves, learning the route that braids market and parish. Hodge contributes stout tallow for the sacristy steps, where boots clack and draughts practice mischief. Sister Elswythe murmurs the blessing text to herself, smoothing any wrinkle with patience. Penalty for tardy tithe is service on Candlemas Eve, trimming and snuffing in the nave until one's hands remember how many people lean on a steady flame. Thomas volunteers early. He likes the sound of ladders on stone and the quiet pride of leaving brightness behind without name. The morning the tithe is due, snow crumbles from eaves as if approving. Packages of light appear like shy birds. Here a bundle for a seamstress, there a pair for a baker, up before dawn. Agnes closes the ledger with a satisfied nod. Candlemas, evening arrives honey-coloured and calm. The nave breathes with hundreds of modest flames, and shadows keep respectful distance. The rule, it turns out, is less about dues than about the delicate art of being useful without being seen. Wax has its own weather. The 22nd rule governs gutters and trays, so tables, ledgers, and wedding cloths do not learn new constellations of drops. Agnes unrolls a parchment of permitted designs: tin drip trays with narrow lips, clay saucers with a tiny moat, wooden sconces lined with horn. The peculiar clause blesses the linen save, a narrow ribbon tied just below a taper's shoulder to catch first tears, then melted free and kept as emergency wick bait. Marit shows Thomas how to test a tray. Tilt and twirl. Watch the meniscus gather like a shy cat against the lip. Hodge arrives with tinwork polished to a modest shine. No ornament may startle the flame. Sister Elswith adds a homespun hint. A pinch of chalk dust brushed on the tray gives wax something to hold. Corbett reads a case from last quarter, a christening cloth kissed by a runaway drip. And the remedy: the maker stitched a new linen edge and taught drip management in that household for a week. Penalty for trays too shallow is practical. An afternoon repouring wax caught from demonstrations. The apprentice learning that waste can be a teacher. Thomas becomes a quiet master of the shoulder. That sweet place where flame, wax, and gravity shake hands. He practices trimming mid-burn, a little topiary of fire that leaves the dome neat. By Vespers, the workshop floor is dotted with cooled spirals, each a tiny fossil of caution. The guild saves them in jars. Nothing is wasted where light is dear. When a family arrives to buy marriage candles, Marit fits simple tin trays beneath them with a smile that says, "The feast will end as tidy as it began." The rule feels like hospitality written in metal. The 23rd rule moves through the nose to reach the heart. Candles may carry herbs if the hour welcomes them, but perfumes that boast are forbidden. Sister Elswith lists the allowed gentle scents: chamomile for births, rosemary for kitchens on wash day, lavender for sick rooms, and a breath of frankincense only by church order. Banned are resins that bully the air or distract a prayer. Let scent be a hand on the shoulder, Agnes says, not a trumpet. Peculiarly, the rule requires a nose circle. 3 people, maker, warden, and a neighbour, stand a pace away while the candle burns and each whispers a single word: soothing, cloudy, or restless. 2 restless votes shelve the batch for street use only. Marit crushes lavender heads between linen, adding only what the wax will befriend. Thomas learns the difference between rosemary's green hush and too much rosemary, which smells like the hedgerow climbed into the room. Penalty for a brash batch is kindly embarrassing. The maker delivers them to the laundry house for steam days, where windows fling wide and scent has work to do. Hodge, who favours the honest smell of tallow, admits that a rosemary taper makes a greasy pan seem less opinionated. Corbett notes a line in the charter: aromata parva, lumen magnum. Small scent, great light. As evening gentles, the workshop airs its experiments. The lavender, barely there, turns corners soft. A single frankincense candle, church-ordered, breathes like a deep note on a vial. Thomas writes, "Scent equals temper," in his book. The rule does not scold. It teaches restraint, which is love disguised as recipe. Books drink light, but ink dislikes heat. The 24th rule sets the scribe's distance. No candle within the breadth of 2 open palms from parchment. No flame directly beneath the line of sight. The guild keeps angled horn shields for monastery desks, so light falls like moon on a page without warming it. Sister Elswith brings a complaint from the scriptorium. Letters fading where a hot taper breathed too near. Agnes measures, then pins a little drawing to the rule board. Here is safe. Peculiarly, the rule recommends ink rest, a tiny pause after each paragraph for the candle to be snuffed, the quill wiped, and the eyes allowed to float beyond the page. Thomas tries the rhythm while copying a psalm, discovering that light can be a metronome for care. Marit shapes scribe tapers with thinner wicks that make small, scholastic flames. They burn like a thought rather than a torch. Penalty for warming a page is to recopy, letter by letter, beside the offended monk, learning how patience cools both ink and temper. Hodge delivers stout rushlights for margin work and learns to enjoy the quiet kingdom of script, a country where lines march without noise. Corbett tells of a town where a charter blistered, the redrafting bound neighbours together better than the original did. At dusk, the scriptorium glimmers, each desk a small island with horned shade. The air smells of oak gall ink and beeswax, old forest and meadow in one breath. Thomas places a finished page aside, its black letters drying to a soft brown that promises to behave for a century. The rule sits contentedly between book and flame, the matchmaker who knows both parties and keeps them in friendship. Time can drip. The 25th rule governs candle clocks. Tapers scored with tiny hour marks used by bakers, bell ringers, and mothers promising stories until the wax says stop. Agnes brings out the guild's brass comb, whose teeth impress even grooves in warm wax. Marit shows Thomas how to account for draft, wick, and season. Winter candles run slower, summer faster, as if the air itself were part of the gearwork. Peculiarly, each candle clock must be tested against the bell at least once per batch. Corbett notes any gain or loss with a neat plus or minus in the margin. The guild allows playful marks, little stars for bedtime, barley heads for oven turns, but forbids anxious ones. No tallying of worries, Agnes says, only hours that help. Hodge suggests a stout kitchen clock for stew nights. Its flame licks contentedly at the hour it owns. Penalty for a lying clock is a week keeping the guild bell, a task that teaches humility and the music of town life. Thomas spends one evening matching his marks to the bell. Each alignment feels like knitting two pieces that were always meant to meet. Sister Elswith orders a set for the infirmary, where rest needs friendly boundaries. By lamplight, the scored candles gleam like quiet instruments. Children buy the smallest ones with pennies, the stars along the side promising exactly the right amount of story. Bakers nod over barley-marked tapers. The abbey cook carries away a pair with pride. Time, which can be a scold, here becomes a companion that leans against your elbow and says gently, "Enough." The rule leaves the town a little less hurried and a little more sure of when to stop. Metal learns your mood. The 26th rule manages the borrowing of heat between crafts. Bell founders, glaziers, and candlemakers share the city's few reliable hearths when weather sulks. Agnes maintains the hearth rota, a schedule more diplomatic than grand councils. The peculiar clause. When the candlemakers borrow the bell founder's great furnace to reclaim spilled wax, they must sing the foundry's counting song while they work, a respectful imitation that keeps timing true. Marit leads Thomas to the foundry, where heat stands like a friendly bear. Hodge, oddly graceful here, pours tallow scrap into moulds repurposed as bales for reclaimed wax. Corbett greets old Mistress Isolde, the bell founder, exchanging compliments like warm bread. "Your steady flames," she says, "teach our bronze to remember its shape." In return, the guild lends tin moulds for glassmaker trials. Tools migrate like well-behaved geese. Penalty for late return is simple service. 2 days helping the host craft sharpened tools and sweep ash until the floor hums. Sister Elswith arrives with cool water and a blessing for working lungs. Thomas watches bronze and beeswax in neighbourly nearness, understanding that crafts are cousins, each a way of instructing matter to keep promises. By noon, the reclaimed wax lies in tidy cakes stamped with a small borrowed bell, a mark of gratitude. Agnes pins the rota for next cold snap. The room relaxes. The rule is less about permission than about the relief of being part of a town that trades heat like favours and returns it with thanks. The candles that later burn from these reclaimed cakes seem especially well-mannered, as if grateful to have been rescued from disorder. Travelling chandlers arrive with carts that smell of other towns. The 27th rule declares a market truce. Guests may sell within marked lanes for 3 days, provided they display their home guild's seal and submit a sample to the honey test. Agnes chalks boundary lines. Corbett welcomes with a bow that has no wobble. The peculiar clause forbids boasting contests. Instead, guilds exchange one recipe each to be tried under the other's sky. Marit befriends a chandler from Bruges who dips long cathedral tapers like pale lances. Thomas trades a Wick rhyme for a clever Flemish cooling rack. Hodge negotiates a friendly partnership for winter tallow when cattle markets stumble. Sister Ellsworth leads a small shared blessing. Nobody's saint is jealous. Penalty for breach, shouting prices, shadowing a neighbour's stall, is a day selling at cost to the poor lane, where lessons arrive wrapped as gratitude. By night, the market lanes glow like two dialects speaking the same language. Children test accents, lumen, licht, and decide both mean safety. On the last day, a tiny ceremony. Each master lights a neighbour's candle and carries it 3 paces, proving it travels well. Agnes records the exchanges. The ledger looks like a bridge drawn in ink. Thomas pockets the Flemish rack sketch. Bruges carries away the shoulder rule. When the carts roll out, the square feels larger, edges combed. The rule turns rivals into guests, guests into stories, and stories into better candles. Manuscript painters gild with light that does not move. So the 28th rule listens to their needs. When illuminators lay gold leaf, no candle may be snuffed or trimmed in the breath of that delicate square. Hold your breath while the gold lands, Sister Ellsworth instructs, and keep the air like still water. Agnes places a breath board on the table, small shields to redirect exhalations. Peculiarly, candlemakers must teach illuminators to shape a calm flame, a wick trimmed to a grain of barley, a posture that invites steadiness. Marit tunes a cluster of desk candles until they resemble disciplined pupils. Thomas times his breathing to their tiny nods. Hodge, hands too large for gold but heart gentled by it, stands farther back, content to be a wall. Penalty for unsettling a gilding session is to burnish in silence for an afternoon, learning the patience that lives between heartbeat and shine. Corbett reads a gentle line from the charter, "Where light meets leaf, let hands be weatherless." The room becomes a tiny climate controlled by posture and care. When the leaf kisses the page, the candle's reflections become tiny moons in the margin. Gold drinks beeswax glow greedily, then gives it back tenfold. Thomas blinks, smiling at the impolite joy of it. The rule, he realizes, is not merely about not doing, but about helping a moment become itself. Later, the pages dry in a rack, each more than picture, map, prayer, small thunder caught and tamed. Summer breeds winged appetites. The 29th rule protects wax stores from moth and heat. Bars of beeswax rest in a cool wax room lined with stone. Bundles are hung, not stacked, and separated by sprigs of lavender and bay. Agnes checks the thermometer of the age, a simple rule of touch. If wax yields to a thumbprint too easily, the door stays shut and the slate reads sleep. Peculiarly, the guild keeps a lavender ward, a day when apprentices bind herb bundles and trade them for news at doorways, placing them in wax cupboards like small sentries. Sister Ellsworth blesses the bundles with a smile. Her novices help tie knots neat as script. Marit rotates stocks by season. Thomas learns to read wax grain, the way a surface can tell a history of sun and shade. Penalty for careless storage is a week rendering scraps back into calm cakes. A fragrant task that teaches respect for order. Hodge fashions slatted shelves that make air into a partner. Corbett explains the night cool trick. Move wax after midnight, when stones sigh out their day heat and the city sleeps like a cellar. The wax room hums like a hive in reverse. Quiet, cool, deliberate. Bars wink pale gold. Lavender circles the air politely. Thomas writes, "Store scent equals stored patience" in his notes, pleased by the neatness of the thought. The rule keeps summer a courteous guest rather than a burglar. It leaves candles someday to burn with memories of shade. Winter stiffens everything, even promises. The 30th rule teaches the warm hand pour. When frost grips, a candlemaker warms hands over steam before dipping, so fingers do not shock the wax into stubbornness. Marit shows Thomas the steam bowl, a pan that whispers rather than boils. One breath too hot will cloud the pot. Agnes posts cold weather ratios, more patience, a hair more heat, never more haste. Peculiarly, the rule allows a wool-lined dip room, curtains hung to tame draughts, floor strewn with rushes. Hodge hangs thick cloth like a theatre, preparing a hush. Sister Ellsworth brings warm stones wrapped in cloth to rest beside moulds, a kindness to metal that wakes slowly. Corbett speaks of temper, how matter prefers kindness to commands. Penalty for frost-brittle candles is a day spent mending cracked household cups with glue of cassine and story, reminding an apprentice that broken things can be steadied. Thomas learns to read the surface of the melt the way farmers read sky. A skin that lifts, a sigh that asks for a turn of the ladle. When the first winter batch emerges, the tapers wear smooth coats, no shivers caught beneath. Outside, breath smokes. Inside, the steam bowl purls like a cat. Thomas keeps his sleeves dry and his humour warmer. Marit nods approval in the language of eyebrows. The rule gives winter a seat near the hearth instead of the threshold. Candles born on such days later burn with a memory of patience, and the rooms they visit somehow remember to be kind. Trade does not end with grief. The 31st rule secures the widow's right. A master's widow may keep the mark and stall for a year and a day, provided a warden inspects batches and an apprentice signs the ledger as proxy. Agnes reads the clause with visible pride. A rule that steadies tables and keeps children in shoes. Peculiarly, the proxy sign is written small and to the left, a modest companion to the widow's mark. Marit remembers her own first months after loss, how the guild's slow patience let her hands relearn timing while her heart learned its new shape. Thomas now serves as proxy signer for old Dame Purnell, whose wrists ache but whose eyes still measures a wick in a blink. Hodge carries crates without being asked. Grief instructs his strength to bow. Penalty for any who press or undercut a widow is market banishment for a fortnight and service delivering hushed hands candles. Sister Ellsworth keeps an eye soft as wool on such stalls, bringing broth that smells of thyme. Corbett places the widow's stall near the east lane, so morning finds it first. Dame Purnell's candles burn with tart efficiency. No extra shoulder, no drama. Thomas learns that steadiness can be a way of being brave without anyone clapping. The ledger grows its quiet proxies. The town eats its bread more calmly for knowing the rule holds. When the year and a day pass, some widows choose to retire their mark with ceremony. Others keep pouring. They're right now simply theirs. Either way, the guild snuffs a candle and lights another, the flame walking across wicks, like a thought choosing new words. Not every hour belongs to sleep. The 32nd rule grants odd-hour licenses to apothecaries, midwives and night scribes who must wake when town tides ebb. Their lamps bear a small blue thread braided into the wick, a badge to the watch that this flame travels with permission. Agnes ties the threads with ritual slowness. Noel the watchman nods at each lamp like greeting a colleague. Peculiarly, Odd-hour flames must learn quiet feet. Marit teaches Thomas to pour lamps that do not rattle when carried. Hodge fits handles with leather that whispers. Sister Elswith orders one for the infirmary ledger, where hours arrive uninvited but deserve to be remembered. Corbett writes the license on parchment smooth as evening water, the ink drying to the colour of old smoke. Penalty for loud light, soot, sputter, clang, is a night walking with Noel, learning how sound is a neighbour whose sleep we consider. Thomas goes gladly, collecting the city's night signs. A cat's decision, a river cough, a shutter's sigh. He returns with a wick, trimmed to the width of a thought. When the odd hours lamp is tested, it carries a small moon from page to page. No more. The blue thread dimly shows at the wick's heart, a gentle credential. The town's dark remains polite. The lamp becomes a guest with good manners. Rules like this one make insomnia kinder, work gentler, and streets less lonely. The guild stamps the license with the crown B. The sound is as soft as approval. Before a name is inked as journeyman, an apprentice must pass the lantern riddles. The 33rd rule sets 3 trials that sound like bedtime puzzles. Make a flame that survives a whispering corner, a draught from an opened book, and the envy of another flame set too near. Agnes places the riddles on the table like biscuits. Marit gives Thomas a wink that says the answers live in his fingertips. Peculiarly, riddles are graded by patience, not speed. Sister Elswith holds a water glass near the wick. The tiny current tests posture. Hodge brings the jealous flame, setting 2 candles shoulder to shoulder until one sulks. Corbett watches for the moment when Thomas moves the bases apart, grants each a circle of breath, and trims the wick at a tender diagonal. The jealous one forgives the room. The other learns to share. Penalty for guessing rather than feeling is another week of practice, but the guild treats it as a treat rather than a sentence. More hours with the mysteries that make craft a refuge. Thomas solves the whispering corner by turning the hornshade just so. He tames the book's draft by lowering the flame's cap to a tidy dome. The room exhales. When Agnes inks the pass mark, Thomas feels taller by the width of a wick. The riddles have taught him that rules are simply the shape of the town's breath written down. Marit presses a token, a tiny tin comb, into his palm. For marks you will make that help someone stop counting worries, she says. Night comes early, but the workshop is bright with quiet victories. Not all promises wear armour. The 34th rule describes the oath candle used by guilds, councils, and sometimes quarrelling neighbours. It must be tall, pale, and unblinking. No gutter, no pop, no reach. Agnes keeps the unblinking rule card. If the flame flutters during an oath, the words, "Wait until calm returns." Marit pours these slow, letting bubbles climb out like shy fish. Peculiarly, the candle is ringed with 3 shallow grooves: faith, craft, neighbour, touched in turn by whoever speaks. Sister Elswith suggests the order. Corbett nods. Thomas polishes the brass base until it reflects a faint, upright flame that seems to stand guard. Hodge, arriving late, removes his cap without being told. Even he knows an unblinking flame is a serious listener. Penalty for a flawed oath candle is service as witness in quiet court for a month, learning to carry other people's words without dropping them. Thomas tests the unblinking quality by opening and closing the door. The flame decides to be a lake. The first oath that night settles a hedge dispute with more gratitude than triumph. The grooves receive 3 fingers, and the room agrees to behave. Afterward, the candle remains lit on the guild table until compline, as if keeping watch while the words root. The rule teaches that light does not force truth. It merely asks for it, and then holds still while truth arrives. Thomas writes, unblinking equals listening, and smiles at how obvious and difficult that is. Feasts swell, flames beyond habit. The 35th rule governs borrowed hearths at festivals. Bakers, brewers, and candlemakers share a great feast fire, watched by a circle, 2 from each craft, who tend it like a tame comet. Agnes sketches a rotation on slate. Sister Elswith sprinkles the first handful of rosemary into the embers for good manners. Peculiarly, the rule requires that at least once, each watcher must set down their own tool and learn a neighbour's, ladle for bellows, snuffer for peel. So sympathy travels with the heat. Marit trades her dip ladle for a baker's peel, sliding loaves as if they were shy boats. Thomas works the bellows for Mistress Isolde and learns the punctuation of wind. Hodge tells a joke that keeps time. Corbett presides from a low stool, more steward than master, making sure laughter never crowds out care. Penalty for neglect at the feast fire is later, quiet and personal. One visits a house whose dinner failed because of smoke and lights candles until disappointment loses its voice. Thomas sees how heat can hurry if unwatched and how patience can pull it back like a friend by the sleeve. By twilight, the feast square smells of bread, malt and beeswax, 3 ways of telling the town it is loved. The candles for the tables are plain and brave. The lanterns for the dancing stride along the rope like small moons on a string. The rule turns many fires into one temperament. People eat, bless, and step in time. Shadows move like companions rather than arguments. Flame leaves letters even when it is gone. The 36th rule sets Ash Day once a month. Soot brushed from shades, snuffers wiped, horn panes washed with vinegar, and all sweepings weighed and written in the soot ledger. Agnes reads the numbers like weather. Less soot, kinder wicks, she says, tapping the column where improvements nestle. Peculiarly, the soot, what others would discard, is saved. Mixed with lye and fat, it becomes blacking for boots. Stirred into vinegar, it becomes ink for practice slates. Sister Elswith stirs gently, turning residue into usefulness. Marit assigns corners. Thomas polishes horn until daylight walks through like a polite visitor. Hodge cleans snuffers, humming the rude version of a hymn under his breath, then softer when he notices the echo. Penalty for skipping Ash Day is a week reading the soot ledger aloud while working, so the numbers become habits pressed into mind. Corbett explains how soot measures more than dirt. It measures how well the rules about trim and draft have been kept. Thomas sees the guild as a machine whose moving parts are people and whose oil is attention. When the last horn panel is clear and the snuffers reflect small faces, the rooms look a shade newer. The soot cakes rest in their labelled tins, like virtuous sins confessed and reformed. The rule teaches reverence for endings as much as beginnings. Later, when the candles are lit anew, their flames seem freshly lettered, and the air is easier to breathe. Candles begin in meadows. The 37th rule honours bee-peace. Every candlemaker owes meadow dues. Seeds scattered for clover and borage. A stretch of path left unscythed. A cup of water set shallow for thirsty wings. Agnes holds a small sack of seed the colour of sunrise. She passes it, as if passing a chalice. Peculiarly, the guild keeps a bee map, a parchment dotted with friendly gardens. Sister Elswith adds the priory's south verge, where novices learn patience from petals. Marit and Thomas visit beekeeper Older, who speaks of queens and weather as if they were cousins. Hodge stands clear but listens hard. Even Tallow owes thanks, he admits, to the world's many grazings. Corbett recites the clause that forbids beating swarms. Instead, a kettle is rung and a linen thrown, a courteous invitation to new housing. Penalty for neglecting meadow dews is public and mild. One must guide children to sow, telling the story of honey's journey until small hands throw seed like blessings. Thomas discovers how satisfying it is to see future light falling from his grip in green promises. Bees arrive, drawn by colour and gossip. The air stitches itself with their gold thread. By late afternoon, the meadow near the Guildhall trembles with new plans. The rule makes candlemakers into gardeners, a truth that was always quietly there. When candles later burn with the faint breath of clover, the town tastes summer even in snow. The ledger gains a new column, seeds sown, a number that glows without needing fire. Sometimes the city chooses to look closely. The 38th rule prepares for inspectors from the council. Floors swept, ledgers ready, and, most peculiar, the line of light. 20 candles placed in a measured row, each lit one heartbeat after the next, flames rising like a scale sung softly. Agnes rehearses the line until the timing feels like walking. Marit trims each wick to the same barley's breadth. Thomas holds his breath on count 5 and 10 to keep the air honest. Peculiarly, the inspectors must walk the line with hands behind backs, speaking only the word clear or cloud. Sister Elswith offers warm cider at the end of the procession. Hodge stands like a courteous door. Corbett welcomes the visitors without flinch. The guild that loves its rules need not fear those of others. Penalty for a muddled line is a week redistributing light to town corners that felt left out, more practice, but in generous directions. The inspectors, to their credit, nod with something like pleasure as the line of light stands without smoke. One, a stern man with parchment eyelids, says clear more softly each time. When the last flame is judged, the council's seal is pressed in wax beside the guild's own. 2 bees meet crowns. Thomas feels a ripple of pride at how well flames can behave when given manners and love. The rule turns scrutiny into hospitality, a shared lesson rather than a test. The inspectors leave with candles for their wives and a story for their supper tables. At last, the 39th rule opens like a gate. A masterwork vigil must burn from moonrise to sun touch with no drip, no sulk, and a heart that never shows impatience. Thomas has poured in silence, trimmed with humility, and set the candle on the testing table as if placing a child at school. Agnes lays the sand jar within reach. Marit touches his shoulder, the pressure saying what words would bruise. Hodge pretends to nap in a corner, and fails. Sister Elswith hums a psalm under breath. Corbett watches the clock of stars through a slit of window. Peculiarly, the vigil must endure 3 small trials: a door breath at midnight, a page turned at matins, and the whisper of a novice's hem at Lord's. The candle answers each with a modest bow and returns to itself. Thomas trims once, a neat diagonal that seems to improve even the air. Hours stack like loaf slices. Nothing hurries. Penalty, if failure came, would be simple: another season of patience. But dawn decides to be kind. When light outside becomes the palest suggestion of milk, the vigil stands with a domed head and a calm puddle. Agnes nods, then nods again, as if counting a blessing twice to be certain. Corbett reaches for the little box of master stamps. Thomas chooses his mark, a barley grain within a ring, tribute to the wick and to circles of breath we give each other. The stamp meets wax on a fresh candle. The sound is the size of a heartbeat. Marit smiles without showing teeth. Hodge claps once, then softens the echo with his sleeve. Sister Elswith sets a hand to Thomas's cheek the way the priory comforts newborns. The rule yields its gift, craft becoming a life. Keys change belts. Agnes sits, almost surprised to be lighter. The guild feels the shift like a boat when weight moves from bow to stern. Noticeable, safe, a new balance without fuss. Outside, morning gathers itself. Inside, Thomas inks a first entry by the new warden's name. Light shall be given with manners. The 40th rule, read to the end, becomes a circle. Oaths, flame, neighbours, seasons, no link heavier than another. Later, as shutters open and the market remembers its feet, Marit walks to the door and hangs the sign with the crown bee. The day finds it. Somewhere a child points at a candle and says, with authority, "That one." And the town, held by peculiar rules that feel like kindness, begins again. Rules are only as gentle as the hands that carry them. The 40th rule records succession. When a warden retires, a new one swears not to power, but to patience. Agnes, after years of keeping ledgers like gardens, lays down her keys. Corbett asks the room who will hold the guild's quiet centre. Eyes tilt to Marit, whose steadiness has become the town's habit. Peculiarly, the oath uses 3 lights: a birth candle, a vigil taper, and an unblinking oath candle. Marit touches each groove: faith, craft, neighbour, while Sister Elswythe recites a blessing that tastes of bees and books. Hodge stands straighter than a bell rope. Thomas, wearing the ringed barley mark, holds the ledger open to a clean page. Penalty for an oath broken is written but rarely spoken. A sabbatical of service. Lighting corners until the town says, "Enough, come home." Marit's voice does not wobble. She promises to keep the honey test honest, to see that blue thread lamps move kindly, to teach the shoulder rule to hands that shake. The room breathes. The candles nod. Corbett's smile carries a season of weather. Only in ancient times did towns entrust their sleeping hours to bees and careful hands, to lantern glass, and to rules that asked for steadiness rather than spectacle. Let the sound of that workshop fall over you now. The soft clink of a stamp set down. The hiss of a snuffer kissed to brass. The murmur of a watchman's steps fading along a lane that remembers every footfall. Imagine the wax room cool as a cellar of milk, lavender breathing in the dark, and the line of light waiting to be woken one calm heartbeat at a time. Names that have become companions: Marit, Thomas, Agnes, Corbett, Sister Elswythe, Hodge, move gently to the edges of the room and then turn, smiling, as if to say you may rest before they do. Slow the pacing of your thoughts. Let Wick and Beeswax be the only nouns you need. Think of meadow dews scattered to clover. Think of Candlemas tapers shading a nave with honeyed air. Think of an oath candle listening without blinking, keeping people honest with nothing more than patience. The shutters draw themselves nearly closed. The market's last whisper folds away. The ledger's page dries to quiet brown. As the last image fades, it does so on purpose, like a flame that bows before it goes out, leaving the room unafraid of the dark it returns to. Breathe in slowly. Breathe out longer, like a small bell that has decided to be wind instead of sound. You are safe inside those old rules. They are not chains, but lullabies. If a draught finds you, move your attention to the leeward side of the mind. If a worry wants to be counted, let a candle clock mark the hour, and then stop. Close your eyes. The guild will keep the watch. The last light nods, and night answers in a whisper.